President Donald Trump had always been known for his boldness, but today was different. He had received a handwritten letter from a small-town farmer, John Mitchell, inviting him to visit his struggling farm. Instead of ignoring it, Trump did something unexpected. He accepted as the presidential convoy rolled into the farm. Secret Service agents surveyed the land with cautious eyes. John, a proud third-generation farmer, wiped his hands on his overalls and extended a firm handshake. "Mr. President, I appreciate you coming, but I won't sugarcoat my words," Trump smirked. "I wouldn't expect anything less." John was ready. John wasted no time. "So politicians make big promises, but farmers are drowning. Prices drop, fuel cost rise. Are you here to listen or just to talk?" Trump raised an eyebrow. "John, the first, respect farmers, but things take time." John scoffed. "We don't have time. Our land suffers. Families break under debt and big corporations buy out small farms." Trump crossed his arms. "I've done more for farmers than most presidents." JN wasn't intimidated. "Then why am I still struggling?" The air between them grew tense. Secret Service agent shifted uneasily, unsure if the meeting would explode into a heated argument. John's wife Lisa stepped into the tension. "Gentlemen, let's sit down." Inside their modest kitchen, John pointed at the fridge. "Mr. President, we grow food for thousands, but can barely afford our own groceries." Trump frowned. "What's stopping you from succeeding?" JN leaned forward. "Big corporation, they buy land, drive down prices, and push out small farmers." Trump tapped the table. "That's capitalism." John clenched his jaw. "There's a difference between competition and being crushed." Trump looked at Lisa, who placed a plate of homemade cornbread in front of him. "Mr. President, you should taste what struggling America really is." Trump chewed thoughtfully. "It's good." Lisa smiled. "Sadly, we sell this at the market, but barely make enough." John sighed. "Farming isn't just a job, Mr. President. It's our life. Our kids should inherit this land, not debt." Trump nodded. "I hear you." John leaned in. "But do you understand us?" For the first time, Trump looked around the humble home. Family photos, worn-out furniture, a crack in the wall. He wasn't in a boardroom or a campaign rally. He was in the heart of America, where words weren't enough. For once, Trump had to listen. JN rolled up his sleeves. "Let me show you something." Trump followed him outside. John held up his hands, calloused, cracked, and dirt-stained. "These hands have worked this soil since I was a boy. My father's hands look the same, and his before him." Trump studied them. "Hard work." John nodded. "But hard work alone isn't enough anymore." Trump exhaled. "So what do you want from me?" JN looked him in the eye. "Not handouts, not speeches. We need real change, policies that don't just favor corporations, but protect us, the backbone of this country." Trump was quiet, smirked. "Ever driven a tractor?" Trump chuckled. "Not lately." John led him to his old John Deere hop in. Trump hesitated, then climbed up. John handed him the controls. "This is what feeds America." Trump slowly maneuvered the tractor forward, gripping the wheel tightly. It wasn't easy. John leaned in. "See, Mr. President, this is more than business, it's personal." Trump nodded, a rare look of reflection crossing his face. "I get it." JN wasn't convinced yet. "Do you?" Trump looked out at the endless fields. "Maybe not fully, but I'm starting to." As they walked back, John wiped sweat from his brow. "We aren't lazy. We aren't asking for favors, but banks treat us like risks while corporations get bailouts." Trump frowned. "I believe in free markets." John shook his head. "Markets should be fair, not rigged." Trump sighed. "The system's complicated." John scoffed. "Not to us, it's simple. If we fail, America's food supply fails." Trump looked at the barn, the land, the effort it took just to survive. For the first time, he saw not just numbers and policies, but people, and that changed everything. Lisa walked over. "Would you like to stay for dinner, Mr. President?" Trump blinked. "Dinner?" JN chuckled. "Weck blunt, but we're hospitable." Trump hesitated. His schedule was tight. His advisors would object, but he nodded. "All right." Lisa smiled. "Good, you'll see what real farm food tastes like." John smirked. "And hear more of my complaints." Trump laughed. "I figured." As they walked inside, John thought maybe this visit would actually make a difference. He just hoped Trump would remember their conversation long after he left the farm, and he had no idea what was coming next. As Trump sat at the worn wooden dining table, Lisa placed a plate of home-cooked food in front of him: mashed potatoes, grilled chicken, and fresh cornbread. John smirked. "No fancy White House meals here." Trump took a bite and nodded. "Good food." Lisa smiled. "Good food made by hard-working hands." John leaned in. "You've heard our struggles, Mr. President, but what happens when you leave? Will this just be another visit?" Trump set his fork down. "I don't forget conversations like this." John studied him. "We'll see." Something about this dinner felt different. Something was shifting. John tapped the table. "Farmers are forced to sell their land to corporations. They control prices, and we can't compete." Trump nodded. "So what's the solution?" John sighed. "Stronger protections for small farmers, better trade policies." Trump rubbed his chin. "I've been tough on trade." John shook his head. "But we still suffer." "We don't need politics. We need real action." Lisa interjected. "Farming isn't just numbers, Mr. President. It's people. Families, generations." Trump looked around the modest home. For the first time, he saw the human side of policy, and it struck a nerve. As the meal ended, John leaned back. "So, Mr. President, what now?" Trump exhaled. "I don't make empty promises." John smirked. "Good, because we don't trust empty words." Trump stood up. "Give me time." John folded his arms. "We don't have time." Trump extended a hand. "I'll do something about this." John hesitated, then shook it. "Then prove it." As Trump left, he looked out at the fields one last time. This wasn't just a political issue anymore. It was personal. John had challenged him in a way few dared, and now Trump had something to prove. 2 weeks later, John was fixing a fence when his phone rang. "This is John," a familiar voice responded. "John, it's Donald Trump." JN nearly dropped his phone. "Mr. President, I didn't forget you. I've got something in motion." John's heart pounded. "What do you mean?" "You'll see soon enough." Click. John stared at his phone. He had doubted Trump would remember. But maybe, just maybe, something was happening. Lisa walked over. "Who was that?" John smirked. "The President of the United States." And for the first time in years, John felt something unexpected. Hope. A month later, John sat in his truck listening to the radio. "We have breaking news," the reporter announced. "President Trump has signed an executive order aimed at protecting small farmers from unfair corporate practices." John's jaw dropped. Lisa rushed outside. "Did you hear?" Johan jumped out of his truck. He actually did something. Farmers across the country watched in shock. A president had listened. A president had acted. JN wasn't a man easily impressed, but this was real. For the first time in a long time, small farmers felt seen, and John had unknowingly started it all. One afternoon, a black SUV rolled onto John's farmer. Secret Service agent stepped out. "Mr. Mitchell, the President wants to see you." John blinked again. Minutes later, Trump stepped out, extending a hand. "Told you I wouldn't forget." John shook his head, grinning. "I'll admit I'm impressed." Trump smirked. "I don't just talk, I deliver." Lisa welcomed them inside. "So what brings you back, Mr. President?" Trump leaned forward. "I want to hear more. There's still work to do." JN was speechless. A president had returned not for a photo op, but to listen, and that meant everything. Trump walked the fields with JN. What else to farmers need? John didn't hesitate. "Infrastructure, roads, irrigation, better equipment, access." Trump nodded. "All right, let's make it happen." John squinted. "You're serious?" Trump smirked. "You should know by now I don't joke about winning." John chuckled. "Well, I hope farmers finally start winning." Trump patted his shoulder. "They will." For the first time in years, John saw a future where farming wasn't a losing battle. Maybe, just maybe, the tides were turning, and it had all started with a simple invitation. News outlets swarmed the farm. "Why did the president return?" one reporter asked. John shrugged. "Because he actually cares." Critics called it a publicity stunt, but JN disagreed. "He listened when no one else did." Trump faced the cameras. "Farmers are the backbone of America. I won't let them fall." For once, the political divide faded. Americans, farmers, workers, families, saw something rare. A leader who wasn't just talking, he was acting. And JN, once skeptical, was now part of something bigger than he'd ever imagined. Calls poured in from farmers nationwide. "John, you actually got him to listen." John laughed. "I just spoke the truth." Farmers, long ignored, finally had a voice. Trump called again. "John, you've become the face of this movement." John shook his head. "I'm just a farmer." Trump chuckled. "And yet here we are." John never wanted fame, but if his voice helped farmers, he'd keep speaking, and the fight wasn't over yet. John sat at his table reviewing new farming policies. He frowned. "We still need long-term solutions." Trump called. "John, the first want you on an advisory board." John was stunned. "Me? Who better to represent real farmers?" John hesitated. "I'm not a politician." Trump laughed. "Exactly." JN looked at Lisa. She nodded. Maybe this was his chance to make real change, not just for himself, but for farmers everywhere. John stepped into the White House feeling out of place, yet as he sat with policymakers, he knew he belonged. Trump spoke. "John, tell them what farmers really need." John cleared his throat. "All right, let him get to work." For years he had fought alone. Now he had the most powerful ally in America. Months later, John stood in his fields watching his children run through the crops. Lisa smiled. "You changed things." John shook his head. "We did." From one heated debate, a movement had begun. Farmers were no longer forgotten, and John, he was still just a farmer, but now his voice mattered, and it all started with a simple letter, one that Donald Trump had chosen to read. Sometimes the most unexpected conversations change history, and this one did.